Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of top. I didn't ruin my own intro. Take two. Sometimes I forget it because I've done it so much, I go into like mode. Anyway, thanks, Lisa. You can cut this. All right, take two. Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in healthcare. And our guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Kuhlman. He's author of a book called Transforming Presidential Healthcare. It's a Ballast Books title. Welcome, Jeff.
Good to be with you, John.
Yeah, excited for this discussion. The book is like full of stories, which, when it ties in a precedent, it just makes it so cool. But before we dive into some of those details, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I grew up in the hills of Tennessee outside of Chattanooga. Went away to medical school at age 19. Um, and the Navy put me through medical school. So I was going to do 4 years, and I ended up serving the country's greatest job there is for 30 years. And the last 16
Wow.
was at the White House, where many of these stories come from.
I mean, what a neat experience. And I guess it's great that the Navy trained you since you served them so much later. It works out that way. That's a great great way to become a doctor. I know a lot of people have done that. What inspired you to kind of write this book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare?
Well, you mentioned about taking care of a president. So in transforming presidential healthcare, you'll hear about, I call it 5.5 presidents.
Okay.
Um, and so with that, some of it is being in the right place at the right time. And my mantra with which each of them was no policy, no politics, just trusted medical advice. And
Hmm.
I actually told them, um, I'll protect your personal privacy, your dignity, your medical privacy. And, um, sometimes the joke would be something funny just happening caring for somebody. They'd say, "Ooh, that'll be in your book." That probably won't be. Um, but it's been over a decade since I left the White House, and often uh, people would ask me specific stories, and then when they heard about it, they would think that that's a unique perspective. There's also been some negative press recently in the past couple years about the White House Medical Unit, um, similar to like the Secret Service. And I would say I want to get the message out there that um, the hard work, the truly transformative care that the White House Medical Unit provides every day to the president, their families, the vice president, their families, senior staff, all those that work at the White House or anywhere in the world is just top notch, and just get out the stories of the team. So that's the purpose of this book, to get the facts out there and let the general public hear the facts.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that was one of the interesting things for me as I was reading through it is how you really are at the behest of the president to take care of the family, the entire entourage, and whoever else they might think that needs a little help. I thought that was really interesting. Which of the presidents did you serve under?
So during President Clinton, I was at the helicopter squadron, which
Okay.
in Quantico, but the White Tops, the VH-3s, the VH-60s, but anywhere in the world the president would go. During his second term, he spent a lot of time on the road. Um, just there are things going on at home, and also every president wants to kind of secure their legacy of foreign policy during the last term.
Mhm.
So those first 3 years, I did 18 countries.
Wow.
Um, and with that, or actually, I'm sorry, 18 trips, even more than that of the countries. And at the tail end of his term in office, I moved up to the White House. So that's a few encounters there. Um, I do remember that I had one brief meeting in the Oval Office, and during that, minute or two, he has a presence about him that makes you feel like the most important person in the world. And then 10 years later, when you run into him, he remembers your name, he remembers what you talked about, he remembers your spouse, and it's just interpersonal relationships he's gifted in
Yeah.
in that. So
There's no
President
surprise he's been successful, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
he's got a
yeah.
skill.
In politics and in diplomacy and the global initiatives. So
Mhm.
President Clinton, then during Bush 43, so I was there for 8 years, and did the junior White House physician job, Camp David physician, um, training and operations director, starting that. Became eventually the White House medical director, had set up cabinet care. Um, and during that time, I did sneak away and do a Master of Public Health up at Johns Hopkins.
Wow.
Um, and so President Bush 43 gave me the nickname Leno for some reason. I don't know, my white hair, but he loved to give people a nickname that many people never even knew my name. They just would say, "Oh, Leno." And
You can at
that
least say Dr. Leno, right?
yeah, yeah, that, and I did get that from Secretary Rice. She would call me Dr. Leno, and because I think just sometimes you don't remember the last name.
Sure. That makes sense.
Um, and then his father, Bush 41, was around as a former president, as a family member. So there were a couple occasions that I interacted him. One was at Camp David. He asked, he would play volleyball with us, which is
Wow.
volleyball in a racquetball court.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, up at the gym at Whie Oak is the name of the gym up there. And he's actually pretty athletic. The media portrays him, differently. If you're watching a Dana Carvey Saturday Night Live skit, but he's athletic. And he said, "Is it okay if I see you about something?" And I said, "Absolutely." So we went over to Eucalyptus, which is the medical cabin, and I took care of his needs. And I talked to his primary care doctor in Houston, his Kennebunkport doctors, just to let them know what I was thinking and about what I had kind of prescribed for him. And a week later, I got an envelope with a handwritten letter from him in the mail to my home address. And
Wow.
so I learned a lot about gratitude, and
Mm.
he was kind of known for that. So that's up to three. Then during President Obama came into office, I was the director. He kind of sat up, a little bit into it. I don't really need a doctor. I'm 47, young and healthy, but Michelle and the girls do. So I'm going with you. So I actually took that as the highest compliment there is. If a man says, "I want you to take care of my family and take care of me too," then that's high praise. And his vice president was uh, Joe Biden, who obviously is um, uh,
Sure. The
the
current.
the current president. And with that, um, I got to oversee his care, and I appointed, in that first month after the inauguration, appointed Kevin O'Connor to be the physician to the vice president. Um, and this is, 16 years later, and they're still providing that care to Joe Biden and his family. And then my half president was, I was able to uh, take care of, on occasion, Hillary Clinton, whether, when she was first lady, when she went off to the Senate, she kind of had her own doctors. But then for President Obama, she was the Secretary of State for 4 years. So they have a doctor. But on Air Force One, on foreign travel, there would be occasion where, you know, she knew me, she knew I had, um, equipment, medications, and could take care of her discreetly, and professionally and competently. So I count that with her the 2016 election, I counted as at the 5.5. So, and the media portrays her as sometimes unfairly and not very, nice or brash or something like that. My encounters with her, she was always professional. She was courteous. She was respectful. She was cordial. Just wonderful to that doctor-patient relationship. So that kind of taught me that sometimes people, um, just judge them based on your personal interactions. Don't necessarily pay attention to the media. She's woman working in a man's kind of world position. So that's the old Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire. She's doing everything just as talented, just in heels and backwards. So
That's a good line. I
and so
like that.
yeah, and it's a lot more in depth in transforming presidential healthcare. Kind of reading the book instead of me just giving you a vignette or two.
That's awesome. Well, I think it's interesting in that you were the doctor across every political spectrum, and I love that that's not a really a partisan thing, maybe just a preference thing for some doctors. If they, have a doctor they already love, maybe there's options or something. I think that's interesting. But talk to us about what does it take to provide healthcare to the president? I mean, the thing that stood out to me was all of the pre-work you have to do when they're traveling. That like that I mean, when I read some of the stories about having to check the hospitals and create contracts with that hospital, and hey, you have to be ready if something happens. And I mean, that one blew me. But I'd love to hear what what are some of the key components? Oh, and the fact that you have to be, is it so a doctor has to be 5 minutes from the president at all times? You talk to us about some of those details of what it takes to provide healthcare to the president.
Um, Yeah, so luckily on the political spectrum, what I learned is if they're blue or red, luckily they're all the same inside. So I was able to,
The
physically,
veins look blue and they bleed red. Is that so?
yeah,
We all
yeah, and
have.
whatever political spectrum, there's still people, and that's luckily that's as physicians, that's what we get to take care of that. Um, and then personally, me, I'm no party, no party affiliation. I just I go with whatever I think is best at the time. Show up and vote, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not. It just depends. So the preparation, first of all, to be a White House doctor, you got to be nominated by your respective Surgeon General of your military service, Army, Navy, Air Force.
Okay.
They all have like one or two that you have to get interviewed. You have to get the top secret clearance, and not just that, you have to be able to get the Yankee White clearance. And there's 4 levels of that. So the highest is Category 1 or 2. So all the physicians are Category 2, and then the physician of the president or the director is a Category 1, which is similar to the pilot flying Air Force One, or the helicopter pilot flying Marine One, or the Secret Service special agent in charge of the protective detail. Because they carry guns, they fly planes. The doctor carries medications and is private with the president of the United States with nobody else around. And
Sure.
so that's just a high mark, and probably the most awesome responsibility, that your job is not only your job is to keep them alive and doing their function as commander in chief, as chief executive, and head of state. So kind of all three. So Americans were kind of over the top. The U.S. healthcare system were over the top for a sitting president. The most likely scenario that can affect their health is a out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Every day in the United States, 1,000 people drop dead, and if we're there with a defibrillator, you don't want to wait that 8 minutes for somebody to show up with a defibrillator.
Yeah.
So we pre-position whether the president is going from the ground floor to the 10th floor. The physician always rides in the elevator, and it's more than just the physician. I'm carrying a bag. In the bag is medical equipment, and my medical training is current. So I'm a ACLS AED physician that has practiced recently on that equipment, and we're going to deliver those life-saving shocks, hopefully in seconds. But that's why we have to be within 2 minutes. Is the guidance that I put into our policies and practice. And so once you define that, then that's why there's a doctor within 2 minutes. And then, doctors, they can do a lot, but they can do 100 times more if they have another set of hands with them. That's a critical care nurse. So the critical care nurse is that complementary part. So then the nurse and myself, we're within that 2 minutes. We have complementary equipment with life-saving medications. Somebody has an anaphylactic reaction. If somebody has a chem bio asymmetrical attack, then there's certain things that you carry to either prevent that or to treat that and keep all of that training up. Once you get past the out of hospital cardiac arrest, then there's trauma. And so kind of the sexy trauma is gunshot wound, knife stabbing. And you may say, oh, that'll never happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think we look at January.
We saw that.
Yeah, I think we can look at July 21 of this year, when you had an assassin aim at a former president and a current candidate, and America dodged a bullet that day. Or every day there's people out there plotting to assassinate our leaders. So there's a term that one of my predecessors, Dr. Connie Mariano, who was President Clinton's physician to the president, she coined the term protective medicine, which is a physician embedded with a group of men and women that carried guns. So usually it's, diplomats, it might be uber wealthy people, celebrities, rock stars, things like that. But if they can legally carry those weapons, that physician is part of that group, and their job is to keep that person alive or keep others alive. So gunshot wound, the longer version is in Transforming Presidential Healthcare. There's a whole chapter to care under fire. So we came up with, here's the procedures that we would use, here's the training, and that is, it's basically, unfortunately, it's lessons we learned from the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan and combat medicine over time. So combat casualty care.
Sure.
So we bring it to the White House medical unit, and kind of the short version is keep the blood in the body and get to definitive care. So we're gonna stop the bleeding, whether with tourniquets, direct pressure. If you get hit once, keep them from getting hit again. Don't worry about advanced airway. Don't worry about C-spine. And then we also use whole blood, which whole blood is the standard of care. The academics still argue, but in the field, when somebody's bleeding out, whole blood is the standard of care. Or there's a medication that we push, TXA, couple gram bolus, that stops the bleeding cascade. But they have to get to a trauma center. We have the trauma center standing by. And sometimes they're not in the nicest part of town, but we don't care. That's the Knife and Gun Club. That's who has the experience. And we're going to go, and they're going to save that life. They're standing by 24/7. So then if you don't have that, say we're going to a developing country in sub-Saharan Africa, or say we're going to a remote, um, location somewhere,
Uh-huh.
we have to have that capability. So we work with uh, Army, Air Force, Navy for different assets that we've got to have around. And so it's what you would expect for the president, and often their traveling party is in the hundreds instead of single digits.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just imagining the logistics of having a doctor and a critical care nurse 2 minutes away from the president. I mean, it must be nice. You're front and center to be 2 minutes away. You get to see everything, right? Pretty close.
Yeah, yeah, but you're more kind of the fly on the wall of history as
Yeah.
opposed to, um, I was pretty proud of myself that I don't think I ever got in the way of a camera shot,
Mhm.
or, my family often didn't believe that I was there because
Because they
I just
never saw
never in
you.
the shots. So
You
I
weren't
think
in the
that,
room where it happened. You're in the room next to where it happened. Is that?
yeah, yeah, that might be a good analogy. But yeah, you also kind of have to know your role, and often physicians, the world revolves around them, but this is the opposite of the president. We're a supporting cast, and then the care by proxy is the other thing that we can do is by caring for those who care for the president, we're caring for him. So that's,
That's a good point.
yeah, and if you take care of people like a team, they'll take care of you.
Yeah, and I want to hear like how has the care for the president evolved over time? I've often heard people say, and maybe I said it myself that like, hey, if we could all have the same care that the president have, we'd have a much healthier society. Like are there things we can learn from caring for the president? I'm sure is there a focus on wellness as well as part of that care? That maybe we could learn something that we should take to the rest of society.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably like a four-part question, so that's really good.
Sure.
Um, I would say that the basic medical care provided to the president has evolved over time since, you know, I think in transforming presidential healthcare, I start with George Washington, and his first thing is he brought Colonel Craik, his military surgeon, his regimental surgeon, kind of along with him, and he would go to him for care. Um, Craik wasn't involved with the initial bloodletting, but there was a lot of people that, the doctors um, did the standard of care at that time. During the 1800s, that looked pretty rudimentary, and it wasn't till the turn of the dawn of the 20th century, till kind of 1901, after unfortunately McKinley was assassinated, and um, both McKinley and Garfield assassination, if you look in hindsight, the bullets didn't kill them, the medical care killed them with the non-septic, the aseptic prodding around. The wisdom was dig in, grab the bullet, and get that out of there. So we're unfortunately, I think Kennedy and Lincoln, there's no amount of medical care today that would have saved them. Maybe Bones McCoy in the future, Star Trek, maybe they'll figure out something that we can go back in time and save them. So, and even like if you think of Vice President Cheney, he and Jonathan Reiner, his cardiologist at George Washington, they wrote a pretty fabulous book that talks about Cheney basically is alive today because of the progression of cardiac care that
Hmm.
evolved over the past 50 years. So it's that balance of providing uh, the standard of care to the president for the times that we live in, whether it's cancer, whether it's cardiac. Um, but I would switch over to there's something called VIP care,
Hmm.
and I would caution against that. Those that you have the best care do not. Think Michael Jackson, Steve Jobs,
Mm.
Matthew Perry, people, and the list goes on of celebrities throughout history or wealthy people throughout history. They get horrible care because they try to dictate and they won't listen
Mm.
to they don't have trust in that doctor-patient relationship. Healthcare is pretty simple. It's information, it's relationships, and it's built on trust. So often my job, during my 13 years at the White House Medical Unit was to get primary care doctors, hey, do everything that you're trained to do. Don't say, well, the specialist is going to look at this. Do everything that you are trained to do. And then the opposite is for specialists to keep them from doing everything they're trained to do. Because, it would be, this individual has explosive diarrhea after they just came back from a trip to Egypt. And so the GI doctor would say, oh, well, we got to scope them from above and below because it might be this rare type thing. And, well, actually, it's probably traveler's diarrhea. Let's give them azithromycin because it's a quinolone resistant area. And so often that's what I found as as a card carrying. My 3 board certifications were family medicine, aerospace medicine, and occupational medicine. And
Mhm.
so kind of the balance of all 3 of those was really helpful. Um,
That's fascinating. I think we can learn something from that
yeah,
personally.
yeah.
It's
So,
like have
yeah,
the general
yeah.
medicine doctor, the family practice doctor do as much as they can, and the specialist less.
Right,
Like,
right. Yeah.
there's a
Oh,
message there.
just save them for the cases that truly haven't gotten better with that primary care. So then the
Interesting.
last aspect is really insightful, your question about wellness.
Mhm.
Um, so before I get to the wellness, usually what people envy of care for the president is, well, the doctor's office is in the ground floor of the residence. So for the president or their family, all they have to do is take the elevator from the second floor or run down the stairs. Uh,
There's not a 3 month wait time for
there's
the
not a 3 month, yeah. So it's so and then we truly fit into their schedule. I remember one time, you know, President Bush is walking by and said, hey doc, I need to see you tomorrow at 7. I said, got it. So I made sure I was in my office at 7 a.m. and I made sure I was there at 7 p.m. And
There's no
uh,
which.
and also I have to be ready that if he doesn't show up at either one, don't hold him against him. And then because maybe he'll say, hey, I got better. But I'm not going to pester him about, what's it about? What do it's he'll let me know.
That's
And he
interesting.
knows that I'll take care of that. And then sometimes, there's a network of informers where the valet might be able to tell, or the people around might be able to say, hey, this is we noticed he's rubbing his eye
Getting
or tweaking
weird or
his neck or
something.
something like that. So then okay, I've got a little bit of a heads up. So I think what people envy is the access to care. um, they don't so they don't get free care. Each president signs up for the federal employees health benefits plan. They have the same plan that senators and congressmen do. They pay the monthly premiums, sorry. And if they see a physician outside of the military, they can pay the deductibles. There's a whole like bookkeepers that handle that. So it's not free care. The protective medicine part is part of our job. Sure, that's funded by DoD, and that's more kind of the responsibility with you know protecting your commander in chief for continuity of government,
Yeah.
continuity of the office of the president. And then the very last thing about wellness. So my training, I went to medical school at Loma Linda University in Southern California, and we in the 1980s, the concept of whole person care.
Mhm.
So I learned at medical school, they taught me how to be a doctor. They taught me great clinical things, but more importantly, they helped me with mind, body, spirit, and how all of those, um, that's the person that you're taking care of. It's not, it's not, a diabetic in room 6. It's you're taking care of John. And, I know John who has mind, body, spirit, what's going on to help you get better. So with each of the presidents, with President Clinton, after he tore his quadriceps tendon down in South Florida, I think it was at Greg Norman's house. His Dr. Mariano told him, hey, typical injury, people gain 10, 20 pounds. So he made a conscious effort to let's do the opposite. So with that, paying attention to diet, paying attention to physical activity, and actually by the time he left office, January 20 of 2001, if you look at the pictures, his BMI looked great. He was active. He had progressed to a plant-based diet. His cholesterol and triglycerides and his blood pressure, if you look at the last physical, were all under control. So his Framingham heart score was pretty low. I don't know what happened in the next 3 years, but you kind of get a busy schedule, busy life, mid-50s man. And let's just say he didn't get quite the attention to detail of that. And I think he ate whatever he wanted and ended up with his quadruple bypass surgery. So I would say as a medical community, we failed him. So and then later he became a Dean Ornish disciple, and I saw an interview and he said, I'm basically a vegetarian except for chicken and fish. Well, hey, that doesn't really count. But I learned to progress to a plant-based diet. That's my health lesson from him. With President Bush, he came into office, I think, like 54 years old. He kind of woke up after his 40th birthday party. The girls were young, and he didn't feel real well after that. If you read his autobiography, and he learned, from this day on, I'm not gonna use alcohol. I'm gonna go see Dr. Cooper, Ken Cooper, the father of aerobics in Dallas. He went every single year. And by the time President Bush came into office, he was in the top 1% cardiovascular fitness for his age in the US. He said, hey, we're going to go out and do a run. The Secret Service detail used to jogging with President Clinton that, everybody could keep up.
Yep.
Bush would run, he got to where he could run 3 miles in 18 and a half minutes. So when you were
That's
a man
impressive.
doing 600 miles, then they had to go out and recruit some 20-year-old.
New Secret Service.
So they don't really like me telling that story, but that's a little bit more stories like that are in Transforming Presidential Healthcare.
It's awesome.
So I learned, and then President Bush, I spent 12 weeks at the ranch down in Crawford. He would spend his day clearing brush. He'd cut out the cedar trees that suck up all the water that aren't native. So then there's more of the natural oaks and I learned, I had a misconception of Central Texas. I thought it was godforsaken like West Texas, but it's actually very pretty. Think Waco, Magnolia, Chip and Joanna Gaines, and it's just gorgeous water and greenery and blue bonnets and just nice.
Yeah.
So I learned to live a physically active life. And what I learned from President Obama is
Just play basketball, right?
temperance personal habits. So if you read his autobiography when he was a younger man, there was smoking, alcohol was involved, other things. And then in his first year in office, I presented different ways to stop smoking. He picked what was best for him, and he did it. So all the accolades goes to him. If you're, he stopped about a week after the Affordable Care Act was, and to my knowledge, the rest of my time there, I was not aware that there were no of the telltale signs that there were before that. So he did it. So temperance in your personal habits. And then that fourth component of wellness is gratitude, which Wish 41, just that positive outlook in life. So that's what I would say. Those are the qualities that not just for if the president has time for, progress to a more plant-based diet, to lead a physically active life, to be, to limit your temperance habits, then, that's part of fitness, which fitness is the fountain of youth. So they can do their job better, and they're going to live longer and happier. And you and I and everyone listening could learn from that'll be more important than kind of the cool vignettes of
Sure.
Tom Clancy stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. It sounds like we all need a chef that feeds us the right food and time to exercise. That would be more powerful than having a doctor 2 minutes away. Like, I think there's
a lot of you won't even need that doctor that's 2 minutes away unless you fall down the stairs and crack your head open or something.
Sure. No, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the technology side of things and the documentation side of things. And, what kind of documentation is required for, when caring for the president? And then how did you see the kind of technology around that evolve? Obviously, at Healthcare IT Today, we've covered the electronic medical record era. You were slightly at the beginning of that, I think.
Yep.
But I'd love to hear, your perspectives on, I guess, do you have to document everything? Is there, there's no, I don't know. It's interesting to think about the legal requirements versus the care requirements. You want to document it for care purposes. I'm sure there's probably some other security purposes and things. But I'd love to hear perspectives on documentation and then like the evolution of technology during that time.
Yeah. Privacy and security are very important for the president and also all of us.
So you're not using a SaaS-based EHR that's on a multi-tenant solution that everyone has access to?
Well, we might, but we may be able to make it where you can't, the bad guy, the North Koreans can't hack into it or something.
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
So I would go a little bit farther back. So I finished residency, moved to active duty in the end of July of 1990. Saddam decided to invade Kuwait a week later. So that first year I was at the Stumps, 29 Palms, and I did full spectrum primary care at the world's largest Marine Corps base in the high desert. I got mobilized 3 times, but they left me there because the reservists they would call up said, oh, well, I don't do full spectrum primary care. So I got to deliver babies, do emergency medicine, and do inpatient care. But we didn't have an electronic medical record at that point. It's all papers and those big stacks that you would carry around between duty stations. So then I got a hardship tour where I went to Pearl Harbor. So my wife and I moved to Hawaii, and I was there mid 91 through the end of 1993. And Oahu was the beta test site for CHCS, which is the military electronic medical record.
The pre-Alta.
Yeah, pre-Alta. And so CHCS, it was life-changing for doctors. What it started out as is lab X-ray imaging. So Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, anything that happened in Hawaii, because it was kind of geographically, you're not going to go from Hawaii. If they went back to the mainland for care, I couldn't see that, but I could see
pre high-speed internet. Yeah,
I could see anything that happened on Oahu. So then that's what I got up to speed on. So then my next duty, I stopped in Pensacola and did the flight surgery training for 6 months, but then ended up in London and worked at the American Embassy in the United Kingdom. And during my 3.5 years there, CHCS, that was the first overseas place that came in. So, I was the only one that knew how to use it, and I was the only one under 40 years old. So I was a super user. I set up our departments. It takes some infrastructure. And then they said, hey, we're doing it at our hospitals in, Sicily and Italy and Spain. Would you go and do that? Okay, twist my arm. So I would go to went to Rota, Spain for a week, and so would set that up for CHCS. So then now it's 1997. I'm at HMX, so that's Quantico, Virginia. It's on the Marine Corps Airfield Air Facility, and this is in the U.S. They do not have any electronic. So I said, we're an operational unit. You could go over to the clinic on main side, but nobody wanted to do that. They wanted to see their flight surgeon because they could get in to see me and I'd take care of them, and probably was more experienced and competent. So we installed CHCS in an operational flight line clinic, and then that was life-changing for them, because now lab x-ray pharmacy, anything in the National Capital Region, if I want to order a CAT scan at Bethesda, I could do that. They don't, I don't have to go through all kinds of hoops. So then in 2000, when I moved up to the White House Medical Unit over in the old Executive Office Building, which is now the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, there was a kind of a nurses type clinic there that they would check blood pressure, things like that. If you can hear the long story in Transforming Presidential Healthcare about getting that up to be a modern clinic, but they didn't have any electronic medical records. So the first thing we did is install CHCS. We can tap into that lab x-ray pharmacy in the National Capital Region. And over the next few years, shifting over to Alta, doing the ambulatory component, because this is all an outpatient doctor's office, doctor's practice. And so with that, getting physicians, PAs, nurses, nurse practitioners, how do we document our ambulatory notes? So with templates, with shortcuts. So that's all Alta ambulatory that then feeds up to, National Naval Medical Center Bethesda, merging with Walter Reed Army Medical Center when they joined together, maybe 2011. For everything in the National Capital Region. So with the president, if the president needed to go to Bethesda or Walter Reed, or if we needed things done there, then we're not going to put George W. Bush in the computer, because just people will look that up for a reason.
Sure.
Not that
Security
there's
reason
to hide,
yeah.
but it's so we would work with our healthcare IT experts at Walter Reed Bethesda, and we would use an alias system. So, we would kind of keep those, those names. We didn't use Smuckatelli or Smithy or anything like that, but they would produce the alias names, and sometimes there's social security numbers, because you have to go through DEERS checks every time to make sure that they're eligible for care. So they're eligible through care through something called the Secretarial Designation Program. So we made sure everything was above board. So we use that for every president and their family, or anyone that we care for that's under Secretarial Designation Program. They would have alias in the electronic medical record. So that gives us to 2013. And, during my time, we would transition from, paper in a notebook locked in a safe to, we had a card of aliases locked in a safe that if we couldn't remember, what alias did we put them under? Because you'd have to give them like a service that they belong to or a rank or the family member. It's got to look pretty cool to people casually looking into it. And
Interesting.
yeah, so then we would
Well,
use
in
it.
some ways, you were the PHR for the president, right? Your brain
Yes,
and your understanding of the full medical history.
yeah,
They didn't need a PHR because
yeah,
they had a whole team that knew every detail of their
yeah.
healthcare.
So some of the unique challenges were, um, how do you, um, over in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, we have hundreds, if not thousands of people that in the next year are going to travel on all these overseas trips. So we actually used the immunization record that was developed at Walter Reed at their allergy clinic. And we used that, and it's probably advanced since that time. And then the other thing is anywhere in the world, if we're taking care of people, we used ambulatory versions that we would use our tablets, and that's kind of right before smartphones. And so we would always push them that, hey, I just, we're on Air Force One, I'm handing out medications, I got a document in the record. So we had, things that if I give you as an individual some medications, I am documenting that in the electronic medical record. And some of it would, until we would get back and sync up, then take time to do that.
No, I mean that's awesome. It's interesting to think about, right? I don't think Cerner, that's another example of a use case that Cerner, now Oracle Health, probably didn't think about when they signed those contracts. But it'll be interesting to see that evolve. But we're almost running out of time here, but I need at least one story. Do you have a favorite story caring for the president? I love the Olympic ones. There's some good
Yeah,
ones that
yeah,
people should check out, Transforming Presidential
yeah,
Healthcare. But do you have
yeah.
a favorite story you could share as we wrap up?
Sure. So probably the story that um, um, like demonstrates the breadth of the care is August of 2008, the Beijing Olympics. I went over there a couple months ahead. It's called the pre-advance. Um, the Chinese dignitaries, the medical support, the embassy doctor, they said, we're going to take you up to the military hospital that is next to the Olympic site. So I went up there, walked through it, and they just try to control everything. And so luckily I'd been to Beijing with President Bush a couple times before and with President Clinton. So I knew other capabilities. So I said, I want to see Peking Union Hospital. So we went there, and they showed me a VIP ward that they had built, which think like Ritz-Carlton tacked onto the top of a hospital. And I said, no, 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 this is nice. I want to see helicopter pad, emergency room, decon, resuscitation room, operating room, post recovery ICU. And why do you want to see that? Well, if somebody gets gunshot wound or knife stabbing, this will not happen here. I said, okay, I understand that it's not going to happen. Just this is what we do everywhere. So we walked through all of that, and I said, okay, tell me about your trauma teams. Oh, they'll be at home. We'll notify them when to come in. And I said, well,
No, thank you.
every other place in the world, these events shut down the streets. You're going to have trouble getting people in. If possible, could you have the trauma teams here at the hospital? So they talked about it, and they said, we'll have trauma team A for 24 hours, then trauma team B for 24 hours. I said, great, thank you very much. So we came in on Air Force One. I was on the backup plane because I was the support doctor on that trip. And there were it was a nightmare of heads of state, for the opening ceremonies. President Bush was sitting next to Vladimir Putin, and the Republic of Georgia was getting invaded at the time. And so, read President Bush's book and decision points about what was going on at that time. But I'm not sure it was truthful what Putin told Bush, but hear that from President Bush. So that's going on. And then what we found out had happened was the volleyball coach's wife, who was a former Olympian, she was walking through Tiananmen Square with her parents. They went to the bell tower. They were in the bell tower, and a man attacked them with a knife and mortally wounded her father, and then stabbed her mother several times, and then also the tour guide that was with him. So they activated the trauma plan that we'd come up with two months ahead, and they got him to Peking Union, and they saved her life, the mother's life. And so I went over there with Chuck Hartong, who was the White House nurse traveling with me, and we went into the ICU. We kind of looked at everything. There's all these IVs and stuff with Chinese characters, but it kind of looked good to us. Went back, and as soon as I got back to the hotel, Mrs. Bush, said, tell me how she's doing. So she was, and I think this was 5 a.m. So she was genuinely interested with, the American family that had been traumatized. Later that day, President Bush is doing motocross on the Olympic course. Not motocross, sorry, bicycle. His bicycle, he would do about 18 miles in kind of an hour, 10 minutes. Wow. And you would fall like once a time, but because you're not doing it, you're not riding aggressive enough in this you do. But the off-duty military aide, Navy Bob, went off a cliff and cracked his chin open. So they contacted me. I wasn't with him. Dr. Tubb, who was President Bush's personal physician, was there. So I said, bring him back to the hotel. So I sewed him up in the hotel with a really nice vertical mattress sutures. And then a week later on Air Force One, snipped out the sutures. So it sort of shows the planning. You can say, well, nothing really happened to the president or the first family, but our job is more to take care of everybody around, and we stayed off the national news or the evening news because any of those incidences wouldn't have been good. So that's awesome. That's kind of just a fun job to care for people using the equipment, using the training, and you can't care if you're not there.
Yeah. Jeff, this was awesome. I love, the stories, the anecdotes. I think that they're so fascinating, and I think people will really enjoy the book. So everyone go search for it on your favorite application book store that you like, Transforming Presidential Healthcare, a Ballast Books title. Thanks so much, Jeff, and thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcast application. Thanks, Jeff.
Great talking to you, John.